This is on a concept we call Bob Lutz, GM, Daimler Benz, and Amazon uh, iPhone world. We also cover um, the news that China is going to allow Tesla to duck tariffs on inbound everything, which we confirmed in an earlier show, but this gives us an opportunity to truly confirm it as it's been confirmed by the Chinese government that they're moving in this direction. The final thing that, as usual, we review our health tips and, some sort of Elon footnotes. Um, First of all, wanted to note we can see all of you when you say hello and appreciate your doing so, but it hurts our response to further views. Um, the next thing I wanted to note is that we wanted to thank our subscribers and our Patreon supporters because it makes a huge difference in the effectiveness of the channel, all that's supported in that fashion. I also wanted to mention that we do have ads, and it also is supportive of the channel. We'd appreciate it if you watch 10 seconds of such. So one of our favorite whipping boys for our show is Bob Lutz in GM. As you all know, he was an executive at numerous companies, and you can see the core concepts that are being executed by all the global automakers, be it VW, Mercedes, etc. And what's awesome is the fact that, you have a situation here where a really interesting phenomenon is happening. This show kind of emerged because maybe 4 days ago I had a chance to drive behind a BMW M3, and the car just sounded and looked awesome. It's, we're now 20 years into the M3 miracle, and it was awesome to see the car sitting there at 500 horsepower, with four pipes coming out the back end. It was just an amazing sounding and looking vehicle. And 10, 15 years ago, dominant vehicles and concepts that we saw on the road. What's kind of happened though is that, as we've talked about before, we ran through the numbers on the car. And what was interesting is I actually ran up on an owner of a similar M3 a few years ago. He looked at me and said, "I love the car, but the repair bills are huge, and when you're running a V8 in a small car, you get excellent performance, but you still have huge problems when it comes to gas consumption running between 12 and 14 miles a gallon." So I was like, wow, it does get expensive, especially when gas prices were a lot higher. So we kind of bring this up as a discussion item because there's an interesting question mark emerging, and the question mark is, are we in a auto world of 20, 30, 50 years ago, and then there are all these parameters that drive the metrics that you would evaluate a company from. An example of this is that in GM's sort of last earnings announcement, you see cash being produced by let's say the sale of the European division of GM being, the cash is redistributed back to shareholders. And that's a very what companies did over the last 20 or 30 years thing to be successful as an auto company. So GM's profitability and ability to return cash to shareholders is a metric. And the head of GM was being praised for operationally, getting that cash back to shareholders successfully and making sure everybody's getting paid. The challenge, though, is what if we're in the world of you need a gigafactory or two to service the next stage of battery technology so that you can keep the company competitive? This is a sort of interesting question because the answer that Lutz and others has come up with is Tesla's demise is lurking in the battery factory, in that it's going to be expensive to have factories like that running while all your competitors have elected to simply source their batteries from others. So clearly there's a disagreement between different entities about what best operating practices are currently, and we will find out how this all works out. And so this is where we came up with our concept for this show of um, is Bob Lutz and GM and Mercedes fighting an iPhone Amazon world? So the second leg of this conversation is a concept called vertical integration. So as we've discussed on numerous occasions, only 25% of the current auto company vehicles are actually made internally. Most of the parts that go into current cars are actually purchased from outside entities. What this means then is that the idea of vertical integration uh, was pretty much a bad idea concluded by a lot of folks in the auto industry over the last 50 to 100 years. But Tesla has sort of moved back into vertical integration. And so this is part of the argument that's being had between the two entities. So as Tesla stays vertical with batteries, autonomous capabilities in the software realm, manufacturing capabilities, there are all these aspects that cause Tesla to have one of the highest percentages uh, of making its own everything in order to deliver a vehicle. And so I thought this was kind of interesting, and one of my sad moments as I sat behind the M3 was the fact that here you have sort of what many considered to be an awesome company with awesome products for a long time. And the game has sort of shifted on them. And the shift is right now, 40% of your cost is in the batteries and and battery technology and your creativity there and the development of that. And you guys have no core competencies in it, and you're buying it from outside entities. So this is either a very brilliant move or a really bad move. And so as we trail what happened to Amazon over the last 15 years, the company has gone from being stated and called Amazon.bomb to all of a sudden, one of the wealthiest companies in the world, and having all these niches of profitability that result in the Amazon.bomb argument no longer existing or being viable. But all of a sudden, the company is just awesome and is a juggernaut in the process. I brought up the whole iPhone element of this dialogue because I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley with Apple products and had a chance to be around Steve Jobs a little bit. And it was fascinating to watch sort of this systematic transition that occurred. And I brought in the whole iPhone discussion because, as you all know, there's a company called Foxconn based in China. And they, according to one of our viewers who just listed on our page, between Foxconn and Hawaii, they have 400,000 people that build either Hawaii's phone products or Apple's phone products in towns right next to each other in Shenzhen. So I just thought this was really interesting because as Tesla's entering China, what we're forecasting, or it doesn't take us forecasting, Elon Musk has argued that all of his cost inputs are half of what they are in the United States and China. So it's our belief that as this first factory gets up and then the second and third one get in, and possibly even a battery factory, what we're going to find is that China/Tesla turns cars into an iPhone and an iPhone manufacturing situation. And so what this means then is that once you have certain economies of scale of size and your supply chain is set up, there's no way that you can afford to shift production elsewhere because there's an efficiency that you've built up in combination between all those elements that makes it extremely costly to shift. So right now we're in a trade war, and there's a discussion of the fact that US companies should completely exit what they're doing in China, by Mr. Trump. And the reality is that Apple might love to do this, but there's an infrastructure for building iPhones that's been developed and a cost structure. And that shift is prohibitive in cost and likelihood very low. And so as we see 17 parts in the engine bay of these cars as we see everything being focused on software and batteries. Um, there's just a lot fewer elements that go into determining the success of these companies, where you're starting to see cars adopting sort of phone habits or consumer electronic habits more and more so than the rules of what you might have uh, seen or experienced with the automobile industry. So it's our belief that there's a problem right now, which is there's a lot of auto companies slash other entities that think they're in the auto business, but they've somehow managed to back their way into the Amazon, iPhone, Apple world. And this is a world that has a completely different rule structure. So as we go back to the conversations that we're having with indirectly with Mr. Lutz, it's a fascinating thing to watch because it's possible that there are certain individuals that are 100% right in terms of the initial logic they were working with, but there's this problem that pops up, which is your logic could be 100% correct and you could be optimizing on it, and at the same time you have your entire market go away from you. So as we further look at what's going on with Tesla and its operations over time, in essence you could therefore have there being a lot of individuals that are saying a lot of things about Elon Musk and Tesla, and all you have is customers happily buying more of those vehicles, and those vehicles are now further and further putting great makes of the past in some serious jeopardy. And so we actually look forward to our, regular conversation with Mr. Lutz indirectly, but it's a conversation not just between Bob Lutz and Tesla. It's actually a conversation between um, the current auto industry and the future auto industry and how it's going to play out. Um, I have to say that one of the examples of which is that I'm still stunned by is the e-tron has come out, and so has there's a lot of electric vehicles out, but the question mark is Tesla has now dropped down to 15 minutes version 3 chargers. So the consumers, as I was thinking about the e-tron, and we'll have a test drive as an example for you guys to view. The real question isn't does the e-tron work, or does it get 200 miles of range, or is that range down to 60 miles when it's below freezing? The real question is, where's your supercharger network that consumers can use? Because if I'm paying $150,000 for a car, I want unlimited range, not unlike what a regular automobile would do. So you guys need to figure this out. And if you don't, it's a sign that you're going out of business. So I think VW through Dieselgate is being forced to embrace this conversation and execute it well. But I think that, other manufacturers are going to be forced into addressing this issue as well, because I think there's a lot of early adopters that will buy those vehicles. But after you become an owner of an electric vehicle and you learn about range anxiety and you learn about the challenges of managing your battery, once Tesla works out some of these quality issues, I think it'll switch, because the ownership experience and things like the cost of electricity and things like performance that destroys everything on the planet, all these different competitive advantages of Tesla separated from the competition and create sort of a buffer that results in sort of more people purchasing the vehicle. So I think that from an investing standpoint, Tesla kind of looks bad right now because of the amount of investment that's going in. But as this China-Tesla relationship expands in terms of the number of factories and types of vehicles, I think Tesla will have the capital to happily pay investors while at the same time to continue to grow rapidly. The only fly in the ointment that I see is where the batteries coming from for these 500,000 cars in China over the next year and a half. And we'll probably get the answer to that in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And I think that it's an interesting sort of challenge. Um, you know, the next thing I wanted to dive into, and I can't do it justice, we've had several people ship to us an article that was written about the future of Tesla and kind of what's going on. Um, the the article is excellent, but the core logic is that for every vehicle put on the street by Tesla, you end up with a larger number of uh, you end up with a larger number um, of sort of oil-based vehicles that are not out there reducing the consumption of fossil fuels. And so we're at about 500,000 Teslas out there. Um, you know, um, the reality is that you know, we're really looking forward to there being 2, 3, 4 million Teslas out there, because you can see the backward impact in terms of the amount of oil consumed and how it's affecting our planet. So I just think there's an exciting what happens down the road as we see large volumes of vehicles sold that represent a Tesla solution to what's happening to global warming, etc. Um, you know, it's interesting because you guys have often referenced the fact that we've hyped on what Bob Lutz is up to and what his thinking is up to. But if you look around, the only option for response that the large auto companies have currently, because they don't make their own batteries, is the same response across the entire industry. They either have no solution, or the solutions they're providing are extremely expensive because their battery packs are so costly. And when they're putting cars on the road, they're very high cost vehicles, um, you know, that don't have, you know, most of the reasons why Tesla is successful. So the issue with Bob Lutz is that, you know, he's retired now and he's rich and he's happy, and so he can make comments that other auto company executives won't, because they would get fired. But he can also make comments because his core logic has been baked into numerous companies, and we can see that you know, illustrated in the process. You know, the one key example that comes to mind is I could have this be a Daimler-Benz CEO conversation rather than a Bob Lutz conversation. And if you look at it, we're routinely bombarded with photos showing the Tesla Semi in action. Daimler's trying to protect its business when it comes to trucks. And so they have these sort of trucks that are out there supposedly having been delivered, but we're not seeing them on the road doing deliveries of any type. And we believe that the answer to this is that when you pay $400,000 for a truck and you have a battery inside the truck that's an 18650 battery that consumes as much as 60,000 or 65,000 pounds of the movable 80,000 pounds that's allowed on government freeways in the US, you kind of end up with a situation where, yeah, we want to say we're doing something to try to preserve our customer base over time, but the reality is that we know that that solution helps us preserve customer relationships, but it's not a very viable option. So I'm actually kind of blown away. There was a question that popped up, what about Chrysler and Ford? Chrysler has decided that they're going to partner with Tesla and actually Tesla to be their EV credit solution. And yeah, in Lamborghini or, I'm sorry, you know, in this case, Ferrari is tied into the Fiat Chrysler. There are some developments going on electric-wise there because they know there's an issue, but we're not seeing any huge solutions coming out relative to that. And we're also seeing, you know, 13,000 losses per car for the Fiat 500. So Chrysler Fiat is making an effort, and it's limited. In the case of Ford, we actually have done a story on the fact that Ford actually has a pickup truck that they're selling to Deutsche Post in Germany, and it's an electric truck with 150 miles that they're not selling in the United States. And it seems as though they're trying to avoid cannibalization, but then they've bought part of Rivian to see what they might be able to do there to leverage that information into their own electric truck solution. So basically, not a lot of noise when it comes to electric vehicles from some of these other major entities. So we're getting a chance right now to sort of roll through a world that's perhaps making a transition from when cars were the domicile of very huge companies with 100 years of pedigree into potentially what I want to call an iPhone world, an iPhone and Amazon world, where there's a lot of cash being invested. There's a lot of naysayers saying things are ugly and bad and terrible and getting worse. But what's really happening is the industries are changing dramatically and lending themselves to new entities sort of taking over because the old entities were busy optimizing on sort of an old business model that doesn't work. So we're going to find out what the answer is in terms of, stay tuned for the next year or two to see what happens. But there's no doubt when you look at what consumer reaction is, who the winner is currently, and we believe that win streak is going to be expanded as Tesla takes on their newest sort of Chinese relationship. And we're hoping it's not the case, but China is being very aggressive here in a lot of different ways, including the latest tariff news that Tesla won't have to pay them. And I think what this means then is you could end up with the same deal that you have with the iPhone and other products that are built in 400,000 deep worker facilities in China that result in, having all or most of our manufacturing done there, and then some final assembly done at destinations around the world from there. I still stick by my argument that the Tesla has a bunch of partners that build in Europe, but I just want to note to you that this is not happening. This is not happening. I apologize for the honk of the horn. We're near ending our show, but we have a non-cooperative neighbor here that's trying to jam me. At any rate, I want to thank you all, for your comments here. I'm sorry, I cannot help you. Wow. So I wanted to finish up our commentary today by saying that, wow, some crazy things can happen to my show. I agree with all of you guys who say that to be the case. I wanted to just in general note that I think this is unfortunate, the theme of our show, because while you have GM returning, the proceeds from selling Europe's operations to refund cash to shareholders, it feels to me a lot like in the case of Rome, where they're having debates in the Senate while they're being heavily attacked by the Germanic tribes and then systematically getting smoked. It just feels to me like the sense of urgency from the major makes, particularly the U.S. manufacturers, is surprising, shocking, and disappointing, because we've already been through the bankruptcy run one time. And as Tesla gets to 1 or 2 million vehicles a year, the pain felt by the big guys, especially as Tesla enters trucks and pickups, etc., is going to be huge, and it's not clear that those entities will be able to recover. So we think it's an interesting circumstance, and we still leave the open question for you guys to answer in our quiz portion. Is this an Amazon iPhone situation where you have heavy investment that looks horrible, and then you have the company come out at the other end and doing well, or combined with the iPhone situation where you end up with all the manufacturing being optimized in places like China, and then all of a sudden everybody else is stuck with that supply chain process. As you may recall, another one of our shows, we had a Chinese executive argue that what's happening is China is trying to develop supply chain addiction for Tesla to production in China, because once you've tasted it and experienced those amazing efficiencies and cost savings, you're addicted, and it's hard to make a transition to anywhere else. Any rate, look forward to any and all of your comments. I saw Jerry, Donovan, Jim. I saw all of you on there. You're on your holiday. You guys are supposed to be enjoying R&R here during our long holiday weekend of September 1st in the United States, but obviously not the case in Europe, etc. Any rate, this is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Just a reminder to do your exactly, Walter. The Foxconn plans got nixed in the U.S. Exactly. Remember, 25 leg lifts on a daily basis. Wanted to also encourage you to remember to not go to bed within 2 hours of eating, preferably 4 hours, so the food can digest and you don't get acid indigestion. We love constructive dialogue. So really what the dialogue here is between the Lutz business model and sort of the Amazon model that we decided to bring up today. We really look forward to you guys sort of taking time out to, share your thoughts on which of these you see emerging and why. And, I think it represents an opportunity for some nice debate. Have a great day. Bye for now. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks for stopping, Stephen and Simon and all the other folks that I can see here. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Tschüss, German. Au revoir, French. Lihitrohot, Hebrew. Hoda Hafez, Farsi. Ni hao ma, Chinese. Zdravstvuyte, Russian. Have some good comments on there. Please do share them at the end of the show. In Jamaica, we say, enough respect, walk good, man. Have a great day. Bye for now. We look forward to your comments at the end. Please take time to like and subscribe, and have a great day, and bye for now.